All right, welcome to the Yalumba Tradition, Innovation, and Leadership Tasting Talk. We are working with Negociants USA, one of our proud partners, and this is an awesome example of how strong one singular brand and one family can be in a country. So after this, we'd love you to be able to describe the regions and the focus wines and to basically talk about the styles and the influences that Yalumba can have in your marketplace and make sure that you find ways and places that you can use these wines. They certainly apply across the market in one form or another. So Negociants USA has been a long-standing respected importer to the United States of Australian and New Zealand wine, as well as South African. We're very proud to have them in our portfolio now. They do stand alone, and we can proudly promote them. In the wine education department, we inspire, we equip, and we empower you. Here you see this beautiful picture of the Yalumba Clock Tower, as the building is called. It's made out of Anguston marble, a particular marble from the city of Anguston. It's a testament to the longevity and the importance of this particular property and the family-run business. It's been a family-run business since 1849. They're on their 12th generation. That's just amazing. All right, so certainly one of the most historic producers, certainly one of the most influential, and also the most innovative. And that exactly is the story that we can tell with these wines, is that they are both creative, historical, and innovative. They're really well rooted in the past so that they can move through to the future with success. All right, so another great picture of one of the tasting rooms here. It's one of the oldest family wineries. It was actually founded by a British brewer, Samuel Smith, who immigrated from Australia, from Wareham, Dorset, England, in 1847 aboard the ship China. Within a year, he had already moved up into what is now the Barossa Valley and settled in the little town of Anguston, where he actually helped as a gardener and then got enough money to buy a vineyard, and the rest is just rolling through history now. And so let's go through that history a little bit, because it is that tradition that we leave behind, that tradition that settles them into where they are today. So we already talked a little bit about this beginning part where in 1849, he buys a vineyard. Now, the way he did this was, as a beginning business owner, he moved, like so many others from South Australia, with the gold rush into Victoria and was successful. He came back with 800 pounds of value in gold, which was a lot of money at the time. It allowed him to buy acreage as well as a team of horses and a harness, and the planting of their own family property started at that point. In 1893, Fred was the heir apparent, and he was starting to promote the wines worldwide. He was positioning Yalumba as a leader in the Australian wine industry, and it just kept going. There was just no shortage of their reputation. They were dedicated to the task, and it regularly moved forward. Brothers Walter and Percy Smith were with their father when the clock tower was finished in 1908. So it really stood there as a testament to coming to Australia as a family with almost nothing other than some knowledge and some techniques and a desire to improve, and then using that motivation as well as some great opportunities and moving into the future. So Wyndham Hillsmith in 1939 leaves Western Australia, where he was working in Perth for the family and playing cricket nationally for the national cricket team as well as the local team, and to some fame and fortune, and took over the winery at a fairly young age, considering how long it would normally be for someone to take over a winery like this. But he begins a tradition started by his grandfather of like, hey, we're going to start this business, we're going to run it, and our age is not going to stand in our way. So in 1966, we have a huge moment in time for the winery, at least as we see it now, because they made a decision to release a particular wine that would they would then believe would be the signature idea of Barossa Valley, and they called it the signature. Is a blend of Cabernet Sauvignon and Shiraz. And what's interesting about it is they made a decision that they would dedicate each label to someone who had been massively influential in Yalumba's history and quality and its longevity. And in the first one, of course, they honored the founder of Yalumba. The signature still maintains its presence in the market today as one of the very best options in buying classic, impressive quality red wine from Barossa Valley. We jump from 1966 to 1985, where Robert Hill-Smith, at the age of 34, sort of following in the footsteps of the youth of Wyndham Hill-Smith, takes over as managing director after growing up, working in the winery, growing up, doing pretty much everything there was to do. He came in and started running it as CEO and manager director, I should say, and started a new movement towards the future and towards the history that we now are more familiar with. In 1998, after a ton of research, after a dedication to the task, after starting their own vine nursery, after continuing to use their own cooperage right there on the property, and doing a ton of research in Vineyard, partially done by Louisa Rose and her team, they actually released the first vintage of Virgilius Viognier, which has been recognized ever since as one of the world's great Viogniers. Definitely something you should have great respect for. Australia's first family of wine was thought up and then founded by Robert Hill-Smith in 2009, and it's a collection of the great family-owned, multi-generational quality wineries of Australia, and they work together to try and defray promotional costs, to show a consistent face to the marketplace that is an example of how good Australian wines can be, and how Australian wines are not necessarily what especially the US market thinks of Australian wine based on what happened with Yellowtail and other mass market brands, to remind people that this area has difference, this area has great quality, and this group of families is dedicated to nothing but great wine. In 2015, Nick Waterman, having come out of the IT world and working in the winery as well, becomes the managing director as an effort to take a different tack, a different perspective on the wine industry in general, with Nick's varied background. And he is maintaining his managing director status through today. So Yalumba's been innovating for decades. This is nothing new. Innovation has been the hallmark of their winery. When they had a difficulty getting the exact barrels they wanted, they opened a cooperage. But it makes total sense, right? You're on the other side of the world. Shipping cost is about space and weight. Shipping barrels that are empty is very expensive. You're counting on a cooperage thousands and thousands and thousands, possibly continents away, to produce barrels to your specifications. So they long time ago established their own cooperage. They bring in the oak, they treat the oak themselves, then they cooper the barrels themselves, which gives them an enormous amount of control about a major ingredient in the flavor of wine. Another innovation that they came to realize they needed was they did not like the quality of rootstock options and the quality of vine cutting options that they were getting in the rest of what they were buying from Australia. They were hesitant to continue to buy them from overseas. And they said, well, why shouldn't we just create our own cuttings, make our own nursery, select our own propagation material, which they did. And they have now become one of the leaders in vine propagation, one of the leaders in creating ways to have virus-free vines and giving a better variety of the right kind of rootstocks for Barossa Valley. And then in addition to that, their nursery allowed them to go in and do genetic research on old vines in Barossa, especially for Shiraz, that were producing wines that they felt like were the best of the best, with intensity of flavor profile without being overripe, and just vines that had obviously adapted to the climate of Barossa. That allowed them to create some new variations on the theme such that it allows them now to propagate vineyards out of that genetic material and have a wine that is so much more uniquely Barossa than it used to be. So as a summary, they have innovated from the nursery to the vine, to the oak, to the bottle, and then all the way to the shelf. They have done what it takes to take a history and a tradition and past experience and bring it to the future, which is the Yalumba difference. They've had 7 Master Coopers at Yalumba. This is a long-standing tradition. This is nothing new for them. They are completely dedicated to the ability that it gives them to be specific about the way oak influences their wine. So here we have photos of hugely important personalities in the winery. These are not the people that make everything happen, but they certainly are the people that are doing the inspiration and doing the high-end leadership there. So you have Robert Hillsmith, who is now chairman of the board. Remember, he took over managing director at age 34. You have Louisa Rose, who is one of the most famous winemakers in all of the world, who has been working with them for decades. And we have Nick Waterman, who is the managing director now, and he left the software engineering to join Yalumba. So he's going to have a different look on the world by nature of the business he was in before. And that's actually really important. It gives them an idea of how to innovate towards the future, even using technology or just the way companies that aren't wine companies innovate in the modern. So Australia's first families of wine was an inspired idea by Robert Hillsmith. It was the idea to collaborate instead of compete with the other multi-generational family-owned wineries that were standing as pillars of exceptional wine and quality and dedication to the task for the country of Australia in the face of large box brands that were dragging Australia down as far as an image in the international public. They have done this very successfully. They collectively use their resources, they travel together, they offer tremendous support for each other, and in the process give a solidarity face to the idea that Australia does indeed have some of the world's great wineries. You should definitely look into all of the members of this family of wineries, but you'll be massively impressed by the time you're done. So when you talk about innovation and when you talk about family-run wineries, people start to pay attention to the land more when they know that their children and their grandchildren, or at least they hope their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren, are going to need this land to provide an income. And so sustainability and concern for the environment is a major issue with Yalumba. You cannot live and work in the same area for 167 straight years and not start thinking about how I treat the soil, how I treat the winery, where's all this waste going, how can I help the planet help me survive. And so protecting the fundamental elements essential to the quality of wine is absolutely paramount to Yalumba, as it's essential to be able to maintain a family business based on agriculture. So here we have the regions of Australia. As you can see, the Australian continent is sort of the United States upside down. She's sort of the Texas and the Gulf of Mexico up there in the north, and then down in the south where you're kind of looking at what would essentially be the West Coast. So it's sort of like all those wine areas are kind of akin to our areas of California, Oregon, Washington. And then, of course, it moves around. And then you see in the far left of your screen the area of Western Australia, which, as far as quality wine, is really concerned with Margaret River and south, but it starts with Perth and heads down. It's important to sort of get a grasp on what the labels are telling you, so let's move on to that. And so here we have the Australian Gi Appellation system. You have states and zones. You can have a super zone and you can have a state. So South Australia is a GI state, and then the Adelaide super zone is the next circle in the dartboard, for lack of a better description. And Barossa is a super zone inside of that state of South Australia. Then you can move into regions. So inside of Barossa, you have Barossa Valley, and also inside of Barossa Valley, or you have Eden Valley. And then inside of Eden Valley, you have High Eden. So it goes from a state zone to a region and then eventually to a subregion. Their subregions are the bullseye on the dartboard. It's important to realize that some labels on Australian wine, that the appellation or the GI, as they call them, are going to start to look similar, so you need to know the differences. So Adelaide, on its own, by itself, on the label, is a super zone that includes everything you see here on the map, pretty much. Inside the super zone, you will find these zones of Barossa, Fleurus, and Mount Lofty ranges. Inside of those zones, you will find regions like Adelaide Hills, or Kangaroo Island, or Clare Valley. So make sure that you get those nested GIs straight in your brain so that you don't think you're selling Adelaide Hills when you're actually selling Adelaide, and you think you're selling Barossa Valley, but you're actually just selling Barossa Superzone. Okay. In the case of Barossa, a zone, it includes both Barossa Valley and Eden Valley, as you can see there on the map. So those are the regions inside of the zone. Barossa Valley, the most famous appellation probably in all of Australia, is part of the Barossa zone, right next to Eden Valley, lower elevation than Eden Valley. It's warm. It's most famous for Shiraz. It is definitely considered a warm wine region. There is a variation on the theme, and certainly depends on vineyard management and so forth to get to your final style. Certainly an area where you can have a lot of old vines, Grenache, Syrah vines with 120, 130 years old, still producing really well. It's an amazing place to see antiquity in vines. When you get into Eden Valley, now it's a region of the Barossa zone. It's next to Barossa Valley. It's higher elevation by across the board. 500 meters above sea level is easy to find in Eden Valley. It's a place where a little bit cooler climate allows things like really great Riesling to be made, as well as Chardonnay, and there's still Shiraz planted there, as well as Cabernet Sauvignon. And this is a place where you're going to find a more deft style of South Australian wine. It's always been that way, and it's continuing to be that way. One of the first very famous wines from this part of the world was Mount Edelstone Shiraz from Henschke. When we get to Coonawarra, now we're moving way south. It's 3.5 hours south of Adelaide as a city. And so you are definitely having to get in a car and make a long trip. It's 3.5 hours from Adelaide. It's like 4.5 hours from Melbourne. And it's famous for one particular specialty, and that's Terrarosa soil. Now, Terrarosa soil does exist in other places. It's basically a combination of wind-blown loam, sand, and clay, and it has ferrous compounds in the soil type, which as they oxidize, turn red. They become rusty, right? And so what makes that particular formation of Terrarosa super special is what you see here in this picture. This picture shows you that Terrarosa soil up on top of calcrete, which is a hard, nearly impermeable form of limestone formation, calcareous formation. It's not actually limestone, but underneath that is more permeable. So it forces the roots to go sideways more so than directly down. The roots can work their way down through this, but it's fairly difficult. So heat stress can be a problem, but the important factor is that you have calcareous material available to the vines at all times. And the beauty of that is that it creates a pH of the soil that's actually alkaline. In other words, the opposite of acidity. What alkaline-based soils do for grape juice is they create lower pH, in other words, higher acidity levels in the grape juice than would naturally occur without it in the exact same climate. So you get these wonderfully balanced Cabernet Sauvignon, primarily wines out of the Coonawarra region. They are unique for that, as well as the idea that there are gum trees, eucalyptus trees all over Coonawarra. And for many tasters, the identity of Coonawarra is that combination of acidity balance with the eucalyptus overtone or undertone in the juice. It's not exclusively that way. Not every wine that you pick up out of Coonawarra is going to have obvious eucalyptus, but it is something that's quite common. The other thing is that iron-based soil will bring into what we normally would associate with Old World, sort of this iron ore kind of thing into wines, and it's just unique, and there's a reason why it's so famous. So the Terrarosa soil, keep it in mind. So the first wine we're going to taste is actually from Eden Valley, and it's the Eden Valley Viognier from Yalumba. It's 100% Viognier. It's wild yeast fermented. They use some barrique and stainless steel tank. As you can see from the data down here, down at the bottom, this is fairly straightforward style of Viognier. However, that pH of 3.48 can be a lot higher, closer to alkaline in warm climates. And so they're doing a good job of restraining this, because when we see in Viognier from Paso Robles or one of the warmer California areas, we're going to see it over 14% for sure. It's going to have less acidity, a lot more roundness. It'll definitely pop with aromatics, but it'll be very lush. Ulumba has done a great job of pulling back on that over lush, over ripe kind of approach that we see a lot of Viognier, and instead it's a pretty balanced wine, especially considering the oak aging and everything else. So give it a taste, hit pause, and then we'll move on to the next wine. All right, so we are now on the 2016 Old Bush Vine Grenache. When we say old here, we are definitely talking old. These vines were planted between 1898 and 1972, so that's some serious vine age going on there. Grenache in this particular part of Australia really flourishes, loves the temperature, loves the warmth, and the soils are great, especially the sandier soils that you'll find in various places. This is wild yeast fermented in stainless steel and then moved to 300-liter French, American, and Hungarian oak, which of course were made by Yalumba specifically for this wine. That's the interesting thing about their cooperage, is the winemakers can go in and they can actually instruct the cooper, hey, I'm making this wine, I want this kind of barrel for this wine. They're not trying to buy off the rack from something else. It's a really cool customization option. Taste this wine, talk about it, where does it belong in your market, and then we'll go to the next wine. So we're going to start with the Menzies Cab now, 2013. Its origins are 1987, when the Hillsmith family really got an opportunity to produce an estate-grown Coonawarra Cabernet. To own a vineyard inside the specific designation of where the cigar is, as they call that particular part of Coonawarra where the Terrarosa is prime, is really now a great privilege, and the Menzies is a great example of that. Take a look down here at the bottom and notice that this is New World, fairly warm climate, Cabernet Sauvignon, but it still maintains a pH of 3.5 and a total acidity of 6.4 grams per liter. That's the acidity that you would expect out of a lot of white wines. It's really brilliantly balanced. Expect this wine to be rich in texture. It's definitely going to have that minty eucalyptus piece of the puzzle. Very elegant. Give it a taste. I think, honestly, if you take this out in your bag and you have California with it or anywhere else, this wine can compete with anybody's Cabernet from anywhere in the New World. Okay, 2013, Signature Cabernet Shiraz. So we have here the classic, most famous wine from Yalumba. This one was dedicated to Andrew Murphy, and is a blend from all Barossa Valley. The Shiraz actually comes from blocks of vineyards planted between 1925 and 1969. So you have a lot of old vine Shiraz blended in with really beautiful Cabernet Sauvignon. And this wine actually is a great representation of how Yalumba has moved towards finding the vineyard sources that offer balance and elegance inside of Barossa Valley. The wine's powerful for sure, but quite deft at the same time. Again, look at the total grams of acidity at 6.7. That's pretty amazing. Give it a try, talk about where you can sell it, and then we'll go to the next wine. So hit pause in the middle. So this is the 2013 Octavius Shiraz. Octavius sort of gets part of its name from the idea that they're using these octagon barrels that they designed themselves. It's 53% Eden Valley, 47% Barossa Valley, and a vine age average of 84 years. This is an amazingly rich, deep, powerful Shiraz without being overly powerful. Look again at the specifics on this wine. Only 14.1 alcohol, which for Barossa Valley is really amazing, and 6.1 grams per liter. The wine's built for age. It's built for food, to be quite honest. I just would love to have this wine with a plate of short ribs and mashed potatoes. Aged in a combination of French American octaves, which is where it gets its name, and then the barriques and hogsheads. Really amazing wine. Give it a try. I think this is a wine that you can take out into the market and change some people's minds about what is Shiraz. Now we move on to dessert. Yes, indeed. Antique Muscat. The Yalumba tradition follows into the Australian tradition that the first wines made there and the longest standing wines made there were fortified wines and sweet wines made from raisinated grapes. Obviously, the world moved away from some of that as a style, and Australia moved away from some of that as a style, but it's still a uniquely gifted country to produce these kind of wines, and they have the vines that would allow them to do it. So this is Muscat grapes. They're picked late for sweetness, and then they spend 10 years in barrel to oxidize and become this beautiful elixir that you find here in front of you. Imagine this with something like sticky toffee pudding, the classic English rich cake with raisins and dates and so forth, or alongside of some sort of sweet and nut dessert, or just with ice cream for that matter. A lot of great applications here. Beautiful wine, rich, raisinated, and floral. 100% Muscat Petit Grand. Give it a try. There's certainly a place in the world for dessert wine still to this day. It's probably going to be most successful on premise, especially if you can get it in a restaurant that will actually put it on the menu paired to a particular dessert or two. All right, so key points that you really need to take away from here. Yalumba is a winery with a long history, great family ownership, super important player in the Australian wine business and the international wine business. They have Viognier as like a darling project that Louisa Rose created, and certainly has sustained and gotten more acclaim for her Viognier than maybe any other Viognier on the planet. They have a philosophy of sustainability, and they have a philosophy of creating anything they need within their environment, like their own cooperage, like their own vine nursery that now supplies themselves, plus other wineries inside of Australia. Be sure to take these wines out. I think that it's important to show Yalumba wines, but I think it's really important to try to show them in multiple ways. So if you move into the individual excursion on Yalumba, you'll see that I've given you some possible selling techniques, including showing them blind, but with a precursor of the category, so you're not frightening the buyer into feeling like they're going to be embarrassed. And to take them out in a mix of wines from other regions so that they show as they should, which is a world scope great wine as opposed to having to compare them to whatever the buyer thinks about Australia. And stand behind these quality. The quality is here. There's no question about that. All right, so remember that at this point, you're going to be looking for a SurveyMonkey survey link that will be available to you so that you can prove that you took this e-version to make up for the fact that you were not available to attend one of the live versions. And we really thank you for your attention. Have a great day.